They thought I couldn't hear them. I was standing barely 10 steps away when Evelyn leaned over to her son and whispered, "Now we can deal with her." She didn't know I'd stopped. She didn't know I was listening. The grass at the cemetery was damp from last night's rain, but I didn't feel the cold. I stood at the edge of the crowd, a few feet behind the last folding chair, staring at the rectangle of earth that had swallowed the coffin. Charles had been gone 3 days. My husband of 52 years, with whom I had shared a house, a life, and silence. So much silence. People were walking back toward the cars, black coats rustling, someone coughing, someone crying too loudly for how little they knew him. Evelyn's grown children, both of them smug in their tailored coats, followed her like shadowy dogs. They'd flown in for the funeral only, hadn't visited Charles once in the hospital, hadn't even asked if I needed anything when the machines stopped. I didn't know which part of Evelyn's sentence burned more. Deal with her, or the casual way she said it, as if I were a broken vase in the way of redecorating. I looked at her then. She was adjusting the collar of her coat, not a tear on her face. That coat, I realized, was one Charles bought her. Years ago, when we were still young, and he still thought pleasing his sister was part of being a good man. I didn't speak. I just looked at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't lower my eyes when she met mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in our bed, my bed now, staring at the pale spot on the ceiling above the headboard, the one Charles always meant to paint over. I thought of all the holidays we hosted just because Evelyn didn't have space. All the Sunday dinners where she'd criticize my food in front of the children, and Charles would chuckle like it was harmless fun. The way her daughter once told me I dressed like a poor woman playing rich, and Charles said nothing. He'd squeeze my hand under the table, as if that made it better. He was a good man in many ways, kind, reliable, funny when he forgot himself. But he was weak when it came to his sister. He let her speak for him too often. He let her take space that wasn't hers. And I let him. After the burial, Evelyn asked if I needed a ride. I said no. She said, "You sure? It's not easy driving at your age." I looked her straight in the eye. "I'm 78, Evelyn. Not a ghost." She didn't laugh. Neither did I. At home, the quiet hit differently. I walked through the house, touching the backs of chairs, the frame of the mirror, the dish we used to keep keys in, even though he always lost them. Everything was where we'd left it, and yet none of it felt like mine. I made a cup of tea. Not chamomile, which he always hated. Earl Grey with lemon. I sat by the window and watched the dusk fall over the fence Charles never finished painting. He was always going to next spring. The phone rang. It was the lawyer. "Mrs. Aldridge," he said, "we've scheduled the reading of the will for next Friday. Evelyn has asked to be present." Of course she had. I could hear her in the background, probably pacing in his office already, ready to count what wasn't hers. I thanked him and hung up. That night, I opened the safe in the study. The combination had never changed. 1969, the year we married. Inside, along with old insurance documents and Charles's military papers, was a sealed envelope with my name on it in his handwriting. I didn't open it. Not yet. I placed it on the desk and stared at it for a long time. Then I took out a legal pad and wrote one sentence at the top. "Let's see how they deal with this." Charles never liked conflict. He believed kindness could fix anything, even disrespect. Especially disrespect. As if giving people the benefit of the doubt made you noble. Maybe it did. Maybe that's what made me the opposite. I used to believe him. For years, I told myself that Evelyn was just a bit much, that her children would grow out of their smugness, that one day they'd see me, really see me, and not just the woman married to the man they needed things from. But you can't wait forever to be recognized. At some point, it becomes your fault for staying invisible. When we were newlyweds, Evelyn came over every other weekend. She'd complain about her husband, about her children, about her job. Charles would listen, refill her wine, laugh at her jokes. I would clear the plates. I remember one night, it must have been 73 or 74, she told him he'd married down, but at least Martha can cook. I was in the kitchen, holding a casserole dish, frozen. I heard him chuckle. That chuckle stayed with me longer than her insult ever did. The pattern never changed. Birthdays, Christmases, funerals. She inserted herself into everything. Charles let her. I let him. When our son was born, she said he had her nose. I nearly choked. She wasn't even trying to be funny. She believed it. At his graduation, she told the crowd she'd helped raise him, though she lived 5 towns away. She hadn't changed a diaper in her life. But I'd stopped reacting by then. I learned to smile in a way that closed doors instead of opening them. The hardest part wasn't Evelyn. It was Charles. He would squeeze my hand in church, wrap an arm around my shoulders when we watched television, fall asleep with his fingers curled in mine. He loved me, but he never defended me. That sort of love carves out your insides slowly. You stay, because the silence between you isn't cruel, just empty. And empty can feel like peace if you call it that long enough. In the early 2000s, we had a chance to travel. Charles wanted to go to Nova Scotia, visit the lighthouses. Evelyn needed some help with her mortgage. She cried on the phone. He wired her most of the trip money. I didn't argue, just unpacked the suitcase and said, maybe next year. Next year never came. When we downsized to this house 15 years ago, Charles insisted Evelyn help with the move. I remember her walking through my kitchen, poking at my cabinets, saying things like, "It's cozy, for now." Like she was already measuring the drapes. That was the first time I felt it. The way she looked at the house, at me, like both were on borrowed time. After Charles's health began to fail, her visits grew frequent again. To help, she'd say, but she never helped with him. She helped herself to opinions, to bank statements she shouldn't have been near, to whispers with the hospice nurse. I began keeping a notebook. Just small things. What she said, what she touched, when she arrived, when she left. At the time, I wasn't even sure why. Now I do. The week after the funeral, Evelyn came by with a pie, store-bought, crust still frozen in the center. She placed it on my counter and said, "You'll want to think about assisted living. It's a lot being alone." I smiled politely. "I've been alone longer than you think." She tilted her head. "Charles wouldn't have wanted you to suffer." That word, suffer, stuck with me. As if being without her was agony, as if solitude was punishment, and she was the savior. I waited until she left before I opened the envelope Charles had left me. It wasn't a letter. It was a copy of the will, his and mine. I'd forgotten we'd made joint documents years ago. He'd updated his 6 months before he died. There were notes in his handwriting, amendments, clauses, and one line underlined twice. "Do not let her push you." I read it again and again. Charles, the man who never spoke against Evelyn, had written this. He'd known. In his quiet way, he'd left me a kind of shield. It wasn't everything I needed, but it was a start. That night, I called our lawyer and made an appointment. The lawyer's office smelled like lemon oil and worn leather, a scent I hadn't noticed before, though we'd been clients for decades. Maybe grief sharpens your senses, or maybe it just removes distractions. Either way, I sat straighter than I usually did, and I didn't bother to smooth the lines in my skirt. Let them wrinkle. I wasn't here to impress anyone. Mr. Feldman looked older than I remembered, or maybe I was just noticing it now. The slowness of his movements, the way he rubbed the bridge of his nose after every paragraph. He'd been Charles's lawyer since 1989. He was careful, professional, loyal, but I didn't come for loyalty. I came for clarity. There have been no official challenges to the will, he said, hands folded, but Evelyn has been vocal. I raised an eyebrow. How vocal? She's asked for a review of the documents, claimed Charles may have been under stress, that he might have made certain decisions hastily. I laughed once, not loudly, just enough to be rude. He updated it 6 months before he died. That's not haste, that's planning. He didn't argue, just adjusted his glasses. There's nothing irregular. Everything's in order. But if you want to make any changes to your own documents, this would be a good time. I do. He waited, pen ready. What are you thinking? I want Evelyn and her children written out of everything. I want it ironclad. No in good faith clauses. No loopholes. He hesitated. Mrs. Aldridge, Martha, I have to say this. Removing close family members from a will, especially after the death of your spouse, can cause conflict. You may be approached, harassed. I smiled faintly. Let them approach. I've been approached my whole life. He didn't smile back, but I saw something shift in his face, a respect he hadn't shown me when Charles was alive. Maybe it was the way I said it. Maybe it was the way I didn't blink. He brought out the file. Charles left the house to you, of course, and the joint accounts, the stocks, the insurance policy. I nodded. Good. But, he continued, he also designated Evelyn as secondary power of attorney. In the event of your death or incapacitation, you signed it together. I felt my throat go dry. When? Years ago, when your son was still alive. My hand trembled slightly, not from fear, from rage. Our son, gone 5 years now, cancer. Evelyn came to the hospital and made it about herself, about how she was the only one left who understood Charles. And she still lingered, even in the paperwork. I want that revoked, I said. He nodded. Of course. After an hour, I walked out of the office with fresh documents in a folder and a resolve that felt heavier than grief. The air outside was colder than I expected. November always sneaks up in this town. Back home, I made a list. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote it in neat cursive, like I was back in school. Each line a decision. Each decision a boundary. Revoke Evelyn's POA, cancel joint burial plot, redirect life insurance beneficiary, update house deed, sole ownership, establish trust, name only one heir. I stared at that last one for a long time. Then I added a name. Claire, my niece from my brother's side. Quiet, awkward girl who brought me soup when Charles was in hospice. The only one who ever asked me how I was holding up. She'd be shocked. She'd argue. But she was decent. The doorbell rang just as I was finishing the list. I knew the rhythm. 3 sharp knocks, then a pause. Evelyn. I didn't move. Another ring. Then her voice, muffled through the door. Martha, it's me. Can we talk? I opened the door slowly, leaving the screen closed between us. She wore a coat too thin for the weather and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi," she said, as if this were a social call. I waited. "I just wanted to check on you. It's been a hard week." I nodded once. "It has." She glanced past me into the house. "I've been thinking. You're here all alone now. That's a lot of space. Have you considered selling?" There it was. I tilted my head. "To who?" "Well," she said too quickly, "my Michael's looking for a place. You know the market's impossible for young couples. This would be perfect." Michael was 42, divorced twice, never worked longer than 6 months anywhere. "I see," I said. "Charles would have wanted it to stay in the family." I opened the screen door slowly, stepped out onto the porch. "You're not my family, Evelyn." She blinked. "Of course I am. I'm Charles's sister." "Yes, you were his sister, and you treated his wife like a tenant for 52 years. Her mouth tightened. "That's not fair." "No," I said, voice quiet. "But it's accurate." She crossed her arms. "You don't have to be cruel. And you don't have to keep coming here." I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently. But the click of the lock was louder than anything I could have shouted. She didn't come back the next day, but Michael did. He showed up around 3 p.m., when the sky was already paling and the neighborhood was empty of kids and dog walkers. I watched from behind the curtain as he stepped out of a borrowed SUV. I recognized the dealership's logo on the license plate frame and adjusted his jacket like he was preparing for a business deal. It didn't suit him. Michael always wore his ambition like a costume, a size too big and a century too late. I didn't answer the door right away. Let him knock twice, then a third time, louder. Only then did I open it, leaving the storm door between us. "Aunt Martha," he said, flashing the same grin he used when he borrowed Charles's tools and never returned them. "Was hoping we could chat." "About?" He chuckled. "Well, Mom said you might be thinking about downsizing. You know, this place is a lot to keep up alone. Just thought I'd offer some help." I looked at his shoes. Expensive. New. Not the kind of thing you wear to visit a grieving widow unless you're planning to walk away with something. "I'm not selling." "Of course," he said quickly. "No pressure. But if you ever change your mind, I'd be more than happy to make an offer. Keep it in the family." I didn't blink. "You live 3 counties away. You've never called me unless your mother told you to. What exactly do you plan to keep in the family?" He shifted. "I just thought you thought I was alone and tired, and maybe stupid." He cleared his throat. "I didn't say that." "No," I said. "You didn't have to." I closed the door before he could finish his polite retreat. I didn't need to hear it. I already had the next step planned. That evening, I took out the folder from Mr. Feldman's office. I made copies of everything: the revised deed, the trust paperwork, the updated will, and labeled each neatly in my own hand. Then I locked them in the safe. But not before I slid one copy into an envelope marked Claire. She'd be by on Sunday. I'd make sure it went straight into her hands. The next morning, a card arrived. Thick, heavy stock, the kind meant to look expensive. The return address, Evelyn Walker. No stamp, hand-delivered. Inside, a single sentence in perfect cursive: "Let's not let things get unpleasant." No signature. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. Charles would have said to let it go, to be the bigger person. But Charles was gone now, and the bigger person doesn't always win. Sometimes, the one who stays standing is the one who stops pretending. I spent that day going through every file in the house: old policies, tax records, notes, anything Charles might have left behind. I wasn't looking for secrets. I was looking for leverage, and I found it. In the back of a locked filing cabinet, one I hadn't opened in years, was a thick manila envelope. Inside, letters. Not love letters, business correspondence. Charles's notes on Evelyn's financial trouble, the second mortgage she hid from her husband, the short-lived loan she'd defaulted on from Charles's name. She'd used him more than once, and he'd never told me. There were receipts, bank statements, checks. One in particular caught my eye, a 5-figure amount, withdrawn 6 months before our son's funeral. I remembered how Charles had been unusually quiet that week. I thought it was grief. Turns out it was guilt. I placed the envelope beside the copy of the trust. Not to use, not yet, but to keep. Insurance, inheritance, influence. She'd built her whole life on borrowed ground, and I was holding the deed. That night, I sat in Charles's old chair, sipping weak tea and staring out at the bare maple tree in the yard. My hands didn't tremble anymore. Not from grief, not from fear. There was a stillness in me now, not peace, but purpose. They wanted to deal with me. They'd forgotten who I was. They'd forgotten that I'd watched and remembered and endured. And that endurance, once you stop using it to survive others, can become a weapon. The first bank call came on Tuesday morning. A bright-voiced young man named Jordan introduced himself as the client relationship manager assigned to me since Charles's passing. He spoke like someone reading from a laminated script, all, "First of all, my condolences," and "We're here to support you in this transition." I let him talk. Then I asked him plainly, "Do I still have joint authorizations on the family account?" A pause. Paper rustling. "Yes, ma'am. It appears your late husband had co-authorized access for a Ms. Evelyn Walker and one Michael Walker, limited to financial inquiries and emergency transfers." "Remove them." "I'm sorry?" "Effective immediately." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll need to confirm your identity through a few security." "I'm ready." By the time we were done, I'd removed Evelyn and Michael from everything. The investment accounts, the insurance policy alerts, even the old savings account Charles had set up for unexpected family needs. That account had over $42,000 in it. I moved it into a new trust under my sole control. Jordan was polite, but confused. I didn't explain. It wasn't his business why a 78-year-old widow suddenly closed every open door in her financial house. But it wasn't sudden. It had been coming for decades. 2 hours later, Evelyn called. Not from her number. From the flower shop near her house, trying to catch me off guard. "Martha," she said, her voice like sugar spilled on a cutting board. "Did you authorize some sort of freeze on Charles's accounts?" I let the silence sit for a beat too long. "You've been calling the bank," I said. "Of course I have. There are matters that need tending to. His affairs, the church donation he discussed, the cemetery fee." "All handled," I said. "Through my lawyer." She exhaled sharply. "You're being vindictive." "No, I'm being precise." "Martha, listen. I understand you're grieving. We all are. But cutting us out of everything? That's not what Charles would have wanted." My mouth went dry for a second. Then I found the words. "You don't get to say his name and claim his wishes in the same breath. Not anymore." She fell silent. Then, "You're making a mistake." "No," I said, calm as the weather. "I'm correcting one." She hung up. No goodbye. That afternoon, I went to the post office and mailed 3 certified letters. One to the cemetery to confirm the cancellation of the double plot. One to the insurance company with the new beneficiary details. and one to Feldman, asking him to schedule a formal update of my personal estate plan. By the time I returned, the porch light had flicked on. Evening fell early this time of year, and with it came another knock at the door. It was Claire. She stood there in her oversized coat, her gloved hands holding a small container of soup. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she said quickly, "but I had extra, and it's the kind Charles liked, so—" "I'm glad you did," I said. Inside, we sat at the kitchen table, just like we used to during her college years when she'd stop by after class. She asked nothing about Evelyn, nothing about money. Just how I was sleeping, whether I'd seen the neighbor's cat lately, what book I'd been reading. After dinner, I gave her the envelope. "What's this?" she asked, turning it over. "It's nothing urgent," I said. "Just some information. For someday." She looked at me, really looked, then nodded. "Okay." I walked her to the door and watched as she drove off, her little car rattling down the road like a loyal dog that didn't mind the cold. I stood there in the doorway for a long time after she was gone, not thinking, just feeling the stillness again, that rare, clean silence that comes when you've locked every door and found no need to explain yourself. They weren't going to inherit a penny, not a single spoon from the kitchen, not a photo from the albums, not a cent from the house they'd already measured in their minds. Because this time, I wasn't going to survive them. I was going to outlive them in every way that counted. They began circling like vultures in silk scarves. The polite phase ended after the bank calls. Evelyn must have realized I wasn't bluffing. That realization hit Michael first. He showed up again, 2 days later, but this time without the forced charm. No borrowed car, no practiced smile, just a clipboard under his arm and the thin film of desperation on his face. "You're making things harder than they need to be," he said, standing on my porch without asking to come in. "For whom?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, just looked out at the yard, where Charles's old wheelbarrow still rested beside the shed. "There are people depending on those accounts." "Not anymore." Michael turned his eyes on me, narrowed. "My mother said you're not well, that you've been erratic." I almost smiled. The script had changed, from concern to character assassination, faster than I expected. "Michael," I said calmly, "how old are you?" He blinked. 42? "Do you think you should still be depending on someone else's husband's savings at 42? His jaw tightened. "This isn't just about money." "No," I said. "It's about entitlement." He started to speak again, but I closed the door before the sentence formed. I wasn't rude, just done. That evening, I took out my ledger, a plain black notebook where I'd begun recording each encounter, every visit, call, letter, overheard comment. I wasn't writing for drama. I was writing for court, if it came to that. Facts, dates, names. I numbered the pages, signed the inside cover, and put it back in the drawer. I wasn't building a case. I was building armor. 2 days later, I received a letter. Real envelope, real stamp. From Evelyn's daughter, Jennifer, the one who used to sneer at my sweaters and once told me my pound cake tasted like a poor person's apology. I opened it carefully. "Aunt Martha, we're so sorry if there's been any confusion. Mom says you've been feeling overwhelmed and maybe misunderstood. Please know we're here to help you transition smoothly into this new chapter. Let's sit down and talk like family. With love, Jennifer." I folded the letter neatly and slid it into the ledger under the page titled Attempted Manipulation, Darker 3. No reply. That Sunday, Claire came again. She brought homemade bread, still warm, and a scarf she'd knitted in pale gray. It matched my eyes, she said. I didn't cry, not in front of her. But when she left, I sat on the edge of my bed, the scarf in my hands, and let the tears fall without sound. I didn't feel grief. I felt recognized. On Monday morning, I called Feldman. I want to establish a formal trust, I said. We've started the process, yes, he replied. No, I want it sealed, executed, filed. I want the house, the remaining accounts, the savings, the bonds, all of it, transferred to the trust. Claire is the beneficiary. Evelyn and her children are excluded. Permanently. He paused. Understood. I can prepare everything for signing by Friday. Make it Wednesday. I could hear the smile in his voice, even if he didn't let it come through fully. Yes, Mrs. Aldridge. Wednesday it is. The next morning, I made a list of everything in the house that had meaning. Not value. Meaning. The quilt my mother had sewn. The silver locket I wore on my wedding day. Charles's Navy medals. The recipe box in my handwriting, splattered with 50 years of sauce and butter and time. I boxed them one by one, labeled each for Claire, not because she asked, not because she expected, but because she never once acted like they were hers to take. When I finished, I walked through the house, slowly, deliberately. I touched the corners of rooms like old friends. I stood in the doorway of Charles's study, smelled the faint ghost of pipe tobacco still clinging to the wood. I said nothing out loud, but I thought, it's mine now. All of it. Not because he gave it, but because I stayed, and I kept, and I remember. The safe in Charles's study had always been something between us. It sat tucked into the wall behind a bookshelf, not hidden exactly, just quiet. He opened it rarely, always alone. I never asked what was inside. That was the rhythm of our marriage. He had his domains, and I had mine. His were made of numbers and papers. Mine were quieter, garden shears, recipe cards, the fine balance of dinner and dignity. But now, the safe was mine too. The code was still the same. 1969, the year we married. I punched it in, not without hesitation. The heavy click of the mechanism sounded like an old truth unlocking itself. Inside, the contents were sparse, but telling. A bundle of bank documents neatly bound. A folded envelope labeled E. Walker, Private, in Charles's handwriting. A small jewelry box I didn't recognize. And beneath it all, a manila folder thicker than the rest. I took them out one by one, placed them on the desk like pieces on a chessboard. I didn't open the jewelry box, not yet. The envelope called first. I unfolded the letter slowly. It wasn't long. 4 paragraphs in Charles's square, careful script. Martha, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've likely had enough of Evelyn to last another lifetime. I won't pretend I was brave when I should have been. I kept the peace too often. I let her walk through our lives as if it were still her childhood home, and I let you carry the weight of her shadows. But I need you to know. I knew. I saw it. And I was ashamed of myself for not stopping it. The folder below contains documents Evelyn never thought I kept. I did. I didn't want to use them, but maybe you will. Maybe it's time someone said, enough. Whatever you do, I trust you. Even if I didn't always show it when it mattered most. C. I set the letter down carefully. For a long time, I didn't move. Just sat there, fingers resting on the edge of the desk. Charles had never apologized like that in life. He'd shown love in safe ways: gas in the car, the porch light left on when I came home late from church. Never in words, but here they were, clear and bare. And now, the folder. Inside were 37 pages, all in order: copies of checks, bank statements, notarized letters. Charles had lent Evelyn money, that much I knew. But what I hadn't known was the scale. Multiple emergency loans. One instance of her forging his name on a refinance form. Several suspicious withdrawals from an account she wasn't authorized to touch. Amounts too specific to be accidents. But the last document was what made me lean back in my chair, heart thudding in a way that felt less like age and more like fury. A signed letter dated 15 years ago, from Evelyn, acknowledging a loan of $75,000 to be repaid in full within 5 years. Interest-free, personal, with her signature. Witnessed. Stamped by a notary. She never paid it back. Never even mentioned it. Instead, she stood at Charles's funeral and whispered, "Now we can deal with her." She had no idea I had the receipt. I replaced the documents carefully, slid the folder back into the safe, and sat for a while, staring out the study window. The garden was brittle and brown this time of year, but I saw something else there now. Not death, not decay, but ground ready to be turned. I opened the jewelry box last. Inside was a ring I didn't recognize. Men's style. Gold, modest. Engraved on the inside, for what matters. It must have been recent. Charles hadn't worn it. Maybe he meant to give it to me. Maybe he meant to leave it for someone else. But he didn't say. He just left it. A symbol, maybe, of what he finally understood. That night, I didn't cry. I made tea. I folded laundry. I locked the safe again. Then I wrote a note to Mr. Feldman. Please prepare legal notice of debt claim attached with notarized loan document. Subject: Evelyn Walker. They didn't come quietly after that. 3 days passed before the first real crack appeared. Evelyn called again, but this time she didn't bother with fake warmth. Her voice was tight, clipped, and sharp like a knife pressed against a counter but not yet used. "I received something in the mail," she said, "from your lawyer." "I'm aware." "A notice of debt collection? Are you serious?" "I'm always serious when it comes to theft." "It wasn't theft." Her voice rose. "Charles gave me that money." "No, he lent it. You signed the paper yourself. You remember that, don't you?" She went quiet. I could hear her breathing through her teeth. "I'm not paying you a cent," she said finally. "That's fine," I said. "Then the court will handle it." "You think you'll win?" "I don't need to think, Evelyn. I have the proof. You signed it. You defaulted. That's not family business anymore. That's legal." "Unbelievable," she muttered. "After all the years we were family." "No," I said, calm as ever. "We were never family. You were Charles's sister. I was his wife. You never saw the difference. That's why we're here." She hung up. Not 5 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I didn't even need to look. I could feel it in the air. The stomp of someone who believed they still had leverage. Jennifer stood on my porch, hair immaculate, coat expensive, lips pursed in that tight line she always used when trying not to curse in public. "This is getting out of hand," she said, before I could open the screen door. I didn't respond. "You're embarrassing the entire family." "No," I said. "I'm embarrassing the part of the family that thought I'd never speak." Jennifer took a breath like she was counting to 10. "You're going to ruin everything. This whole thing with the will, the trust, the house. What are you even trying to prove?" That your name on someone else's money doesn't make it yours. She gave a short, cold laugh. You think Claire's going to thank you for this? She's going to feel guilty. You're setting her up to carry the burden of all your grudges. That hit something. Not because it was true, but because she knew where to aim. I stepped out onto the porch. You know what Claire did last week? I asked. Jennifer blinked. She helped me clean the gutters. Carried the ladder herself. You ever cleaned anything that didn't belong to you, Jennifer? She flushed. I'm not here to argue. No, I said. You're here to threaten. Don't bother next time. I turned and went inside, shutting the door behind me. The quiet after confrontation is a strange thing. It doesn't feel like peace, not right away. It feels like adrenaline leaking out of your bones. I sat down, poured myself a glass of water, and waited for my heart to remember its rhythm. Later that evening, Claire called. I heard, she said, no greeting needed. They're furious. I didn't ask how. News moves through families like smoke, no shape, just direction. They'll come after me next, she added, quieter. They might. You know what they'll say. I do. She was silent for a moment. I'm not afraid of them. I didn't think you were. Another pause. Then, but I am worried about you. Are you sure you want to go through with all of this? I looked around my house. My quiet, old, fading house. I thought about Charles's letter, about the years I'd folded myself smaller so others could feel big, about the borrowed sweaters, the secondhand snubs, the dinners where my food was good enough to eat but not to compliment. I've never been more sure of anything, I said. Claire exhaled. Good. I don't need you to take sides, I added. She laughed. You're the only one who's never asked me to. That night, I took out the final draft of the trust papers. I laid them out on the table. Each document had weight. Each line had consequence. I signed every page with steady hands. It didn't take long for the escalation to reach its natural next step. Intimidation in a necktie. Wednesday morning, just past 10, I heard the sound of polished shoes on the front path. Too crisp for family, too confident for salesmen. I didn't answer right away. Watched through the curtain as a man in his mid-40s stood there, briefcase in one hand, the kind of watch on his wrist that measures meetings, not time. I opened the door slowly. Mrs. Aldridge? He asked, voice neutral. I am. My name is Daniel Kessler. I represent Evelyn Walker and her family in several legal and financial matters. Do you have a moment? I stepped onto the porch but didn't invite him in. Let the morning chill do its part. I'm here out of courtesy, he continued. The Walkers have expressed concern over some recent actions that may have complicated, long-standing family understandings. Family understandings, I repeated. Yes, ma'am, particularly regarding financial transfers, estate amendments, and... There were never understandings, I interrupted. There were assumptions. Those are different. He shifted, trying to regain his rhythm. Regardless, my clients would prefer to resolve this amicably. They're willing to forego any claims if certain matters are reversed. For example, the recent notice of debt collection stays. And the restructuring of the trust stays. He hesitated. Mrs. Aldridge, if this proceeds, it will likely cause embarrassment. For all parties. There may be public filings, depositions. I looked him dead in the eye. You think I care about embarrassment at 78? I'm simply suggesting a more peaceful path. I've been peaceful for 50 years. It didn't get me very far. A pause. His voice softened. They say you're doing this out of bitterness, that grief is clouding your judgment. Then they're half right, I said. There is grief, but it's not clouded. It's clean. It's the clearest I've ever been. He didn't know what to say after that. He handed me his card, gave a rehearsed nod, and walked back down the path with shoes that made no noise this time. I kept the card, not to call him, just to remember the name of the man they sent when they realized charm had failed. That afternoon, I met with Feldman at his office downtown. He had everything ready: updated estate documents, court filings, letters of instruction for the bank and the investment firm. It was done. "You're sure?" he asked one last time, pen hovering over a final confirmation. "I've never been more." He nodded and signed. "This will hold up. Ironclad." As I walked back out into the street, the wind caught at my coat and lifted it slightly, like the house itself exhaled behind me. I felt light in a way I hadn't in years. Not happy, but finished. On the way home, I stopped at the florist. Not Evelyn's usual shop. A different one on the other side of town. I picked out a single white lily. The woman at the counter asked if it was for someone special. "No," I said, "it's for me." That night, I opened a drawer in Charles's study and took out the photo albums. One by one, I flipped through them. Our son's first steps. The road trip through Oregon. Charles in his Navy uniform, grinning without knowing why. Me, younger, quieter, wearing dresses I didn't like because Evelyn said they made me look respectable. I took out the oldest picture. Charles and I on our wedding day. I studied our faces, looking for clues. Signs of what was coming. There were none. Just hope and youth and the kind of trust that thinks time will always be gentle. I put the albums back and sat in the chair by the window, the one Claire had helped me dust last week. They'd tried charm. They'd tried pressure. Now they'd send threats dressed as compromise. But I'd already lived through worse than this. What they didn't understand was that I'd stopped being afraid the moment Charles died. Because when someone who kept you silent is gone, silence stops feeling safe. It starts feeling like a choice. And I was finally choosing to speak. The papers were signed, the trust filed, the will rewritten, witnessed, and sealed. It was done. And yet, silence didn't follow. Instead came the unraveling. It began with a call from the cemetery office, a nervous woman on the line asking if I'd indeed canceled the joint plot with Charles. "We were just confirming, ma'am. Ms. Walker called yesterday inquiring about future interment arrangements." I nearly laughed. Evelyn, trying to lay herself beside a man who barely tolerated her company in life, thinking death would make her family again. I confirmed the cancellation. The woman on the phone lowered her voice and said, "Good for you," before hanging up. Next came the letters. 3 arrived in 1 week. All unsigned. All in the same looping, artificial cursive. "You'll die alone. You're ruining your husband's memory. No one will visit your grave." I burned them in the kitchen sink without reading the rest. Claire came by more often now. She brought groceries, refused the money I offered, and once left a bouquet of marigolds on the table with a note. "You are not alone, no matter what they say." I didn't cry when I read it. I just folded the note and placed it in the safe, beside Charles's letter. But not every day was brave. Some mornings, I sat with my tea and wondered if I'd gone too far. If maybe, after all those years, I'd finally stepped over a line not meant to be crossed. Was I punishing them, or simply refusing to be punished further? I thought of Charles then, his quiet retreat whenever Evelyn spoke over me. The way he'd say, "She doesn't mean it," as if intention canceled impact. He loved me, but not loudly, never protectively. He never stopped them, not once. And I had stopped him from stopping them, with my silence, with my nods, with my efforts to keep peace. Peace. That damn word. It meant women like me didn't get to feel anger without being labeled ungrateful, that we had to accept poor treatment if it came with a smile, that we had to be gracious in the face of slow, private erasure. No more. On Friday morning, I received a call from Feldman. His tone was cautious. "They've retained counsel," he said. I assumed they would. "They're threatening to contest the will, claiming undue influence, that you're not of sound mind." That last part nearly made me laugh. Not because it wasn't cruel, but because it was so predictable. "I have documentation," I said. "Letters, dates, records of every incident. Let them try." Feldman cleared his throat. "Martha, I have to say, this could drag out. It may not end quickly. Are you prepared for that?" "Prepared?" I said. "I've been preparing for 50 years. I just didn't know it." That afternoon, I took out my notebook again and began cataloging everything with fresh eyes. I documented each visitor, each call, each veiled threat. I scanned the old letters Charles had left. I printed out the bank transfers Evelyn made using Charles's access, the dates she visited when he was too sick to know she was reading his statements. I even took photos of the mailbox, in case the letters came again. I wasn't just protecting the trust anymore. I was protecting my name, my story. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Claire. She was helping me prep vegetables for a stew. I told her, in a quiet voice, what they were trying to do, that they were calling me unstable, unfit, manipulated. She didn't flinch. "Do I look manipulated to you?" I asked. She looked at me and said, "You look like the first woman in 3 generations of this family who finally said no." Then she reached across the table and took my hand. "You're the reason I know how to mean what I say." And that was the moment I knew. I wasn't just taking something from Evelyn and her children. I was giving something to someone better. A legacy, not of money, but of boundaries and of truth, finally spoken. It all came to a head the following Wednesday. I knew something was wrong the moment the phone rang before 8 a.m. Nothing good ever happens before breakfast. The voice on the other end was crisp, irritated, and far too polite. "Mrs. Aldrich, this is Annette Moore from the Walker family's legal representation. I'm calling to notify you that we have officially filed a motion to contest the trust restructuring and the updated will. You will be served formally by the end of the day." I stirred my tea slowly. "Thank you for the courtesy call. I would advise you to reconsider your position. There's still time to settle this quietly." "There is nothing left to settle," I replied. "There is only what's mine, and what was never theirs." She didn't say goodbye, just hung up like someone brushing lint from a coat. By noon, the courier arrived. A young man with acne and a clipboard, shifting on his feet like he was late for class. He handed me the envelope and mumbled, "Have a good day," like he hoped I wouldn't remember his face. Inside, the petition was just as expected, language carefully crafted to sting without sounding emotional. Uncharacteristic financial decisions, possible influence by younger family members, concerns regarding the testator's cognitive capacity. Cognitive capacity. They were calling me senile, convenient, coming from people who hadn't spoken to me in months. some not in years, until they found out they weren't in the will. I sat at my desk, breathing slowly. Then I called Feldman. He wasn't surprised. "They'll lose," he said flatly. "But they'll drag their feet, make noise, paint themselves as victims. It's a playbook I've seen 100 times. I want a response filed immediately," I said. "I want it on record that I am willing to go to court. I want them to see I'm not bluffing." "Already drafting it," he said. "You'll have it in hand by Friday." After I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I cleaned the kitchen, made soup, changed the bedding in the guest room even though no one was coming. But when I reached the bottom drawer of the linen cabinet, I found a photograph I hadn't seen in years. Charles, Evelyn, and me, taken during one of those forced holidays back in the 90s. We were all younger then. Charles had more hair, Evelyn more charm, and I more tolerance. But what struck me wasn't the smiles. It was the space. There was an inch between Charles and me, an invisible line, and Evelyn stood between us, her hand on his arm, like she'd never stopped being the center. I burned the photograph that evening, not out of rage, but clarity. That night, I slept like a stone. By Friday morning, the response from Feldman was ready. I signed it with hands that didn't tremble. Claire came by around noon and drove me to the notary. On the way, she kept stealing glances at me like she wanted to ask something. At the last red light, she finally said it. "Are you afraid?" I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "Not anymore." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I think they're scared of you now." "Let them be." When we got back, she helped me carry groceries inside. As she unpacked, she paused over a jar of peach preserves and said, "You know, I was 12 the first time Jennifer told me I wasn't really one of them." I looked up. She said I was the offshoot, not a walker, not important. My stomach twisted. I'd never known that. "She was right," Claire said. "I'm not one of them, but I'm proud of that now." I placed my hand over hers. "So am I." Later that day, I received another envelope, this one from Jennifer herself. No handwriting, just typed lines on expensive paper. "You've poisoned everything. This was our family's legacy. You won't win." No signature. I folded the letter once and placed it in my notebook under the heading, "Final Proof." It wasn't just about money anymore. It never had been. This was about control, about narrative, about who got to be remembered as the victim and who got to be framed as bitter. But I wasn't bitter. I was finally free. And I didn't need them to like it. The knock came just after dark. I was setting the table for one, out of habit, not loneliness, when I heard it. Not the polite double tap of the mail carrier or the quick ring and run of a delivery boy. This was slower, heavier, a knock meant to be heard, not answered. I opened the door just enough to see his face. Michael. No lawyer this time, no clipboard. Just a man in a windbreaker too thin for November and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept since the filings were delivered. "Aunt Martha," he said, "I told you not to come here again. I know, I needed to talk to you, without the others." I didn't speak, didn't move. He shifted on the step. "Can I come in?" "No." He looked down. "Okay. Then I'll just say it here." The street behind him was empty, cold, quiet. I waited. "They're losing it," he said. "My mother, Jennifer. Even Claire's name coming up in these arguments like she's some kind of puppet you're using." "I'm not using anyone," I said. "They are." He looked up at me, and for a moment, he looked like the boy who used to sit at my kitchen table and pretend to do homework while sneaking cookies when Evelyn wasn't looking. I know what we did, he said. I know what they did, what I did. We were awful. I was awful. I thought it was just how families were, that it was all fine because you never said anything. I raised an eyebrow. So because I didn't scream, it didn't hurt? He winced. No. I mean, yes. I mean, I didn't know any other way. You're 42, Michael. I know. And now that the money's gone, you've remembered your manners. That's not why I'm here. Isn't it? He stepped back slightly, the cold finally reaching his face. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I don't expect anything. I just needed you to hear it. I studied him for a moment. The hands in his pockets. The slump of someone who finally realized the door doesn't always open. I don't hate you, I said. His eyes flickered. But you don't get to be forgiven just because you feel bad now. Forgiveness isn't a transaction. It's not something you collect like inheritance. He nodded slowly. Okay. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even say goodbye. I just closed it gently and turned the lock. After he left, I sat by the window and watched the wind whip through the dead hydrangeas by the fence. I thought about what he said. Not the apology, but the silence that came after it. I believed him. And I also didn't. The problem with apologies is that people think saying them resets everything, but words don't erase years. They don't scrub away the kitchen scenes, the snide comments, the way your name is never really said with warmth. They're just words. But at least this time, they were late, not absent. I made tea, not out of ritual, but comfort. The kind of comfort you earn, the kind no one can take from you. When Claire called that evening, I told her what happened. She didn't say, "He means well." She didn't say, "That's something, right?" She said, "You didn't let him in." Good. And I knew she wasn't talking about the door. The hearing was set for January. It wouldn't be a full trial, just the first step in the contestation Evelyn's lawyer had filed. Preliminary objections, Feldman called it. But I knew what it really was. A performance. An attempt to paint me as confused, unstable, and easily led, as if a woman who kept her mouth shut for 50 years must have lost her mind the moment she opened it. The court date didn't scare me. What scared me, if anything still could, was how familiar their tactics were. Dismissal disguised as concern, invasion framed as help, accusation dressed up as pity. But I had my folder, my notes, my voice, and for the first time, they would all be used. Claire insisted on coming with me. She sat beside me in Feldman's office as we reviewed everything. The room was full of paperwork and fatigue, and still she didn't flinch. "They're going to bring up your age," Feldman warned. "Try to frame this as erratic behavior. Too many changes in a short time." "Let them," I said. "They don't know how long I've been changing." He smiled faintly, the way people do when they're impressed, but know better than to say it out loud. Later, at home, I pulled out an old tin from the top of the closet. Inside were receipts, photos, scraps of paper with old grocery lists in Charles's hand. Among them, I found something I hadn't seen in years. A birthday card from Evelyn, sent to me in 1985. It said, "You've always been so good at making do. Not happy birthday, not you're loved. Just that." A quiet reminder that my role was to survive on less and never complain. I'd kept it all these years, proof of something I couldn't name at the time. Now I knew. It was evidence, not legal, emotional. A testament to what women like me are expected to tolerate. I didn't destroy it. I placed it beside the others, not to fuel my anger, but to remember the shape of it. The Sunday before the hearing, I made a pie. Not for anyone else, just for myself. Peach with a crumble crust. The kind Evelyn always criticized for being too soft. I ate a slice with my fingers, standing in the kitchen barefoot, the radio playing static. It was the best pie I'd had in years. Claire stopped by that evening, helped me wash the dishes, then sat at the table quietly. "They'll lie," she said. "I know. They'll say you're doing this out of spite." "I am," I said, "and self-respect." She looked at me, and for the first time since this all began, she smiled fully. Not polite, not supportive, just proud. "You're going to win," she said. I didn't answer. Because it wasn't about winning anymore. It was about being seen. Fully. Without apology. At night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house like I used to when Charles was sick, checking windows, lights, doors I knew were already locked. But this time, I wasn't afraid of intruders. I was remembering what I had built. This house. This life. The quiet dignity I'd protected even while being trampled by the louder ones. And now I was protecting it differently. Not with silence, but with steel. The courthouse was smaller than I remembered. It had been years since I'd set foot inside. Not since Charles and I filed the deed transfer when we moved into this house. Back then, he did the talking, and I signed where they pointed. I didn't speak unless spoken to. I dressed plainly. I made myself small. Not today. I wore navy, not black, not gray. Navy like the uniform Charles once wore, like the inside of a storm cloud. My hair pinned back the way I used to do it when I wanted to feel composed. Claire walked beside me, her steps steady, matching mine without trying to lead. Feldman was already inside, briefcase open, files laid out like tools before surgery. He nodded when he saw me. No pep talk, no warnings, just acknowledgement. He knew I was ready. The Walkers arrived late. Evelyn, draped in a shawl too bright for the season. Jennifer behind her, jaw clenched, arms folded like someone who'd already made up her mind about the outcome. Michael brought up the rear, quieter than usual, eyes on the floor. They didn't look at me. Not really. The hearing itself was procedural. Statements, motions, objections. Their attorney tried to question my state of mind, citing the sudden and sweeping nature of the trust changes. He referenced my age, my recent bereavement, and potential outside influence. He meant Claire. He didn't say it outright, but he didn't need to. He painted a picture of an old woman confused by grief, manipulated by a younger relative into disinheriting her late husband's rightful heirs. Feldman was quiet while they spoke. Then he stood, calmly, and began. He presented the documentation. The notarized loan Evelyn never repaid. The letters Charles wrote. The financial records showing Evelyn's unauthorized access. My own notes, dated, signed, backed with supporting materials. He read Charles's handwritten amendment aloud in full. Do not let her push you. You could hear the shift in the room, the silence of something landing too squarely to ignore. The judge was restrained, professional. But I saw it in her face, the flicker of recognition. This wasn't a confused woman being manipulated. This was a woman who'd simply had enough. When it was my turn to speak, I stood without needing help. My name is Martha Aldridge, I said. I'm 78 years old. I was married to Charles Aldridge for 52 years. I have been underestimated for 53. A pause. I let the words settle. I am not confused. I am not unstable. I am not being influenced. I am angry. And I am finally using what I've earned. I looked at Evelyn then. really looked. "You were his sister," I said, "and you treated me like a guest in my own marriage. You smiled while taking. You taught your children to do the same. And when the man who protected you more than he protected me died, you assumed the silence he left would be mine to carry." I let out a breath. "But silence isn't loyalty, and I don't owe you anything." I sat down, slowly, deliberately. My knees ached, but my back was straight. The judge said we'd have a formal ruling in 2 weeks, but everyone in that courtroom already knew. Afterward, in the hallway, Evelyn approached. Alone, her shawl slipping from one shoulder. "I don't understand how you could be so cold," she said, not quite looking at me. I looked her in the eyes. "I was warm for 50 years. You just didn't notice." She blinked, once. Her lips parted like she might speak again, but nothing came. Claire and I walked out together. The sun was high, and the wind had softened. I felt it in my chest. Not pride, exactly. Not victory. Just breath. Real breath. Full and clear. 2 weeks later, the ruling arrived by certified mail. Claire was with me when I opened it, sitting across the table with her tea untouched, hands folded in quiet solidarity. She didn't ask what I hoped it would say. She already knew, not because I'd told her, but because she'd watched me become someone who didn't hope anymore, someone who acted. The judge upheld the trust. Every clause, every exclusion, every name I removed stayed gone. Feldman called later to walk me through the language, but I didn't need his summary. I understood perfectly well what it meant. They got nothing. No house. No money. No keepsakes or clauses to bend in their favor. Not even a sentence left in their honor. I had erased them without spite. Only precision. Like cleaning dust from a table you intend to sit at alone. The next day, Claire helped me box up the last of Charles's paperwork. I kept his letter, the ring, and a single photograph. Not of us. Not of our wedding or some false happy holiday. Just one of me. Taken by him. In the garden. Late afternoon sun on my face, hands deep in the soil, mouth half open in a laugh I don't remember making. That was the version of me he never showed his family. The one who was happy on her own terms. I kept that one. Everything else went into the fire. Afterward, we baked a pie. Claire rolled the crust. I sliced the peaches. We didn't speak much. We didn't need to. There was a peace between us now, not built on silence, but on recognition. That weekend, I received one last letter. No return address. The handwriting was Jennifer's, her old way of forming the M like a little crown. Too proud, too precise. It said only, "You may have won the court, but we'll never forgive you." I read it once. Then, without ceremony, I tore it in half and fed it to the same flames that took their claims. Forgiveness from people who never offered it themselves wasn't worth seeking or fearing. I stood outside that evening, the sky wide and dimming, and listened to the world breathe. No voices from the past. No imaginary footsteps behind me. Just the creak of old wood and the rustle of dry leaves. And I thought, this house is mine now. Not because Charles left it to me, but because I stayed when it was cold. I repaired the pipes when they burst. I held the grief when he couldn't. I grew old in its corners and strong in its silences. They didn't lose because I was cruel. They lost because I remembered who I was. And I refused to forget it again. Now, I sit in my chair by the window each morning with my tea. I watch the same neighbor walk her dog, the same mailman wave, the same world continue. Only it doesn't feel the same. It feels like mine now. And if this story meant something to you, if you've ever been underestimated, silenced, or pushed aside, then let it stay with you. Follow for more stories like this. Share it if it echoed something quiet in your own life. And never forget, they only win if you stay quiet.